47%. Nearly half the hours you remain awake, your mind is not where your body is. It wanders through places that don't exist, conversations that will never happen, memories that have long passed. Gurdjieff called this waking sleep, the condition in which humanity is born, lives, and dies without ever realizing it was asleep. You don't think your thoughts, they think you. Dozens of small selves take turns commanding your body, making promises that other selves will have to keep. And none of them knows the others exist. The most efficient prison is one the prisoner doesn't recognize as a prison. But there is a key. The same masters who diagnosed this condition mapped the way out, and it begins the exact moment you realize you were sleeping.
There is a number that should disturb anyone who encounters it. Nearly half the hours you remain awake, your mind does not inhabit the present moment. It wanders through places that don't yet exist, conversations that may never happen, memories that passed long ago. About 47% of conscious existence unfolds in a completely internal world, invisible to everyone around, often invisible even to the one inhabiting it. Stop for a moment and consider the weight of this information. Nearly half your waking life happens somewhere else. You are physically present, eyes open, body functioning, tasks being executed, but true consciousness is absent. It traveled to some imaginary scenario, some future worry, some old resentment, and most of the time, you don't even notice it happened. George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, the Armenian master who taught in the early 20th century, recognized in this phenomenon a truth far more serious than simple distraction. He claimed that humanity lives in a state of waking sleep. People don't sleep only at night when they lie down. They sleep while walking the streets. They sleep while talking with family. They sleep while making decisions that will affect the rest of their lives. Their eyes remain open, but true consciousness is absent. Gurdjieff called this the greatest secret hidden in plain sight. People are born asleep, live asleep, and die asleep, imagining the whole time that they are awake. They spend entire decades without ever questioning whether what they call wakefulness truly deserves that name. The difference between nighttime sleep and the ordinary waking state, according to him, was merely a difference of degree. In both cases, the person is not truly present. The human mind produces somewhere between 6,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day, fragments, impulses, sparks that appear and disappear before anyone even notices they were there. No one controls most of them. They simply arise like bubbles rising in a dark lake, burst on the surface of consciousness, and are replaced by others before we can examine them. These automatic thoughts represent the activity of a machine running on its own. You don't think these thoughts, they think you. The difference seems subtle when stated this way, but it changes absolutely everything about how we understand the nature of the mind and the possibility of inner freedom. When I say a thought occurred to me, I'm describing something that happened to me, not something I did. The thought appeared. I was there when it arose. But who decided that specific thought at that specific moment would occupy my attention? Certainly not me. It simply came. This disturbed me deeply when I began to observe. Only a tiny fraction of daily thoughts, somewhere between 1/5 and 2/5, appears in the form of conscious words, those internal phrases we hear clearly in our own heads. The rest exists as fleeting images, distant sounds, memories that surge like flashes, diffuse bodily sensations, intuitions we understand without needing to explain to ourselves. Most of what happens inside our heads remains below the threshold of verbal consciousness. We process the world through channels we rarely visit deliberately. And even when we do visit, we find a strange landscape, filled with contents we didn't choose, inhabitants we didn't invite, conversations we didn't start. Gurdjieff taught that 4 states of consciousness are possible for human beings. The first is ordinary sleep. the state we enter when we lie down at night and consciousness shuts off. The second is the so-called waking state, the one we spend most of the day in, believing we are awake. The third is self-consciousness, a rare state where a person actually perceives that they exist, that they are present, that they observe. The fourth is objective consciousness, where one sees reality as it is, without the distortions of the self. Most of humanity, according to Gurdjieff, oscillates only between the first two states. Sleeps at night. During the day enters a second type of sleep that it confuses with wakefulness, and dies without ever having experienced, except in rare accidental moments, what it means to be truly awake. We go through life operating on autopilot. We react instead of act. We are thought instead of thinking. We daydream while imagining we are present. And the prison becomes so familiar we don't even notice the bars. The most disturbing thing is not discovering that we sleep. It's discovering that we didn't know we were sleeping, that we confuse dream with reality, automatism with choice, reaction with action, that an entire life can pass in this fog without anyone noticing, not ourselves, not the people around us, who are also asleep. But if there is sleep, there is awakening. If there is a prison, there is a key. The same traditions that diagnosed this condition also mapped paths out. The first step, always, consists in realizing we are sleeping. Only those who know they sleep can decide to wake up. There is no normal way to think. This discovery should unsettle anyone encountering it for the first time. For decades, each of us assumes that the way we process the world internally represents the universal standard, that everyone thinks the same way, that the experience inside another person's head resembles, in essence, our own. We are profoundly mistaken. There are at least 5 completely distinct ways of processing the world internally. About 40% of people function primarily through inner voices. They maintain constant conversations with themselves, argue, plan, rehearse dialogues that may never happen. These people's minds rarely fall silent. There's always someone talking in there. Approximately half of all people think primarily in images. For them, the inner world presents itself like cinema. Scenes, faces, places, objects that appear and transform. Others process the world through pure emotions. Thoughts arrive as emotional reactions, moods that color everything, diffuse bodily sensations. Another group experiences thoughts as physical sensations. The idea appears first in the body, then in the mind. And there's an even stranger group, people who experience no visual or auditory association with their thoughts. They think in pure concepts, no images, no words, no internal sounds, just direct understanding. When I discovered this variety, something changed in how I understood human communication. How many times do we talk with someone assuming they process the world like us and fail completely to make ourselves understood? Gurdjieff offers a key to understanding this diversity in a much deeper way. He taught that no one possesses a unified self. Inhabiting each person are dozens, perhaps hundreds of small selves, each with its own desires, its own opinions, its own will. These selves take turns at the controls without asking permission, without warning, without leaving a record. One self wakes up in the morning, determined to be productive. Another self appears at 10 o'clock, wanting to procrastinate. One self promises to diet on Monday. Another self eats the cake at 3 in the morning. One self swears to save money. Another self buys something unnecessary the next day. And each of these selves says, I, with the same absolute conviction, as if it were the sole inhabitant of that body. We make promises we can't keep because the one who promised is not the one who must keep it. One self signed the contract, another self received the bill, and neither knows the other exists. Perhaps those 5 ways of thinking don't represent types of people. Perhaps they represent different selves, taking command at different moments. The verbal self plans and argues. The visual self imagines and projects. The emotional self reacts and feels. The sensory self remembers through the body. And the person who wakes up in the morning is not exactly the same one who goes to sleep at night. Gurdjieff used a disturbing image to describe this condition. He compared the human being to a house full of servants, but without a master. The servants take turns answering the door, receiving visitors, making promises on behalf of the owner. Each acts as if they were responsible for the house, but the true owner never appeared, perhaps sleeping in some forgotten room, perhaps not even knowing the house exists. We live like this. Different parts of us take command, make choices, establish commitments, and then disappear, leaving other parts to deal with the consequences. The sensation of being a unified, coherent, continuous person represents one of the greatest illusions we carry. The inner work, according to Gurdjieff, consists in observing these selves without identifying with any of them. Watching the internal theatre without believing you are one of the actors. Noticing the irritated self without saying, "I am irritated." Noting the anxious self without concluding, "I am anxious." Observing the self that wants to give up without immediately obeying its command. This observation creates something new, something that didn't exist before. A center of gravity that can begin to coordinate the scattered servants. A master who begins to awaken in that forgotten room. But first one must see. See without judgment, without haste, without trying to fix anything. Just see how many selves inhabit this body we call ours. Just notice how they alternate, contradict each other, sabotage one another. Just observe the internal chaos that normally remains invisible because we're too busy being each of these selves, one after another, without ever stopping to ask who is really in charge. The answer, most of the time, is disturbing. No one is in charge. The house runs by itself. The servants take turns, and the master keeps sleeping until someone decides to wake him. A simple experiment reveals chasms between human minds. Close your eyes and imagine an apple. Try to see it as clearly as possible. Observe its colors, its shape, the light reflecting off the skin. What do you see? Some people see the apple as if it were physically present. Perfect textures, realistic shadows, light reflections dancing on the surface. They can rotate it mentally, bring it closer, move it away, observe it from different angles. The image possesses the same sharpness as a photograph, sometimes even more vivid. Others get only a vague impression, something like a faded, low-resolution photograph that disappears the instant they try to examine it more closely. They know there's an apple there, but they can't really see it. Some see only the word apple written in letters, or have the abstract idea of apple, the pure concept, with no accompanying image. And about 1% of people see absolutely nothing, a complete void where the image should be. Darkness, visual silence. This condition is called aphantasia. Many people with aphantasia spend entire decades without realizing they differ from others. When they hear someone say, "Imagine this," they assume it's just a figure of speech. Discovering that other people actually see internal images can be shocking for them. This made me question something fundamental. If we differ so much in the capacity to see internally, in what other dimensions of inner experience are we radically different without knowing? The great Sufi master Ibn Arabi, in the 12th century, mapped this territory with extraordinary precision. He spoke of an intermediate realm between the material world and the purely spiritual world. He called this realm the imaginal world. The term demands attention. Imaginal does not mean imaginary. It's not about fantasy, daydreaming, or illusion. It's about a real plane of existence where subtle forms dwell, where dreams and visions occur, where prophets and saints receive revelations. The imaginal world occupies an intermediate position in the cosmic hierarchy. It's above the dense material world that our physical senses perceive. It's below the purely intelligible, spiritual world that transcends all forms. It's the place where the spiritual becomes corporeal and the corporeal becomes spiritual, where angels assume visible forms, where abstract truths clothe themselves in symbols. Ibn Arabi taught that the human heart possesses two eyes. One is reason, the other is imagination. When only one of these eyes dominates, perception becomes severely distorted. Reason alone sees only the dense, material, measurable world. It reduces everything to concepts, categories, analyses. It loses the dimension of mystery. Imagination alone gets lost in groundless daydreams. It confuses symbols with facts. It substitutes reality with fantasy. But when both eyes work together, balanced, coordinated, portals open to realities most people never perceive. The awakened heart can navigate the imaginal world without getting lost in it. It can receive visions without being deceived by them. It can distinguish between true imagination and mere fantasy. We lost this capacity somewhere in history. Modernity taught us to distrust imagination. We relegated the imaginal to the status of unreal. We closed one of the heart's eyes and called it progress. But the imaginal world didn't disappear. We simply stopped perceiving it consciously. It continues operating in dreams, in intuitions, in moments of insight that arise without explanation. People with extremely developed internal visual capacity, those who see the apple in high definition, perhaps have this imaginative eye more open than average. Templer Grandin, the scientist who thinks entirely in images, describes her mind as a visual database where every concept exists as film. She doesn't translate ideas into images. The ideas already are images. Ibn Arabi would recognize in this description a manifestation of the imaginal eye functioning with unusual intensity. For him, this wouldn't represent a defect or anomaly. It would represent a door, perhaps cracked open by accident, perhaps opened by grace, to a mode of perception we all possess in potential. The constant internal monologue, that voice that won't shut up, that comments, judges, plans, worries, represents just one possible way of inhabiting the inner world. There are others. The imaginal world offers an alternative to verbal chatter, a way of knowing that doesn't depend on words, a direct perception that reason alone cannot reach. The question is not abandoning verbal thought. It's discovering it doesn't need to monopolize our inner life, that there are other rooms in this house, that we can learn to visit them. The human mind possesses capacities we use constantly without realizing how extraordinary they are. Think of a song you know well, any song. Let it play inside your head for a few seconds. Can you hear it? About 80% of people can reproduce music mentally with almost perfect precision. Some hear so vividly that the experience becomes practically indistinguishable from actual sound. Every instrument, every nuance, every variation in volume happening inside their own head. It's not memory of having heard. It's the experience of hearing now, without any external source of sound. The mind is generating, in real time, a complete auditory experience. The brain activates the same regions it would activate if the music were actually playing. For all practical purposes, you're hearing something that doesn't exist outside of you. This should astonish us far more than it does. Another phenomenon, even stranger. Anyone can speak to themselves using voices they could never physically produce. Try it now. Imagine the voice of someone you know, a friend, a family member, a movie character. Let that voice say something in your head. Did you manage it? Internally, we all become voice actors without limits. We can perfectly imitate every person and character we know, even those whose voices our vocal apparatus could never reproduce. Voices too deep, too high, with accents we've never mastered physically. In there, everything becomes possible. There's a rarer phenomenon, but deeply revealing. About 15% of people can feel physical sensations just by thinking about them. They imagine touching cold metal and feel a slight chill in their fingertips. They think about running their hand over velvet and experience a subtle sensation of texture. They visualize something painful and feel an echo of that pain in their own body. When I discovered that this capacity varies so drastically between people, many things started making sense. Those who can simulate physical sensations internally tend to score higher on measures of effective empathy, the capacity to actually feel what others feel, not just understand intellectually. The connection makes sense when you stop to think. If the mind can simulate physical sensations from thoughts, it probably also simulates the emotional experiences of people around it with more intensity. Seeing someone suffer isn't just observing. It's, at some level, participating in that suffering. The boundary between self and other becomes more porous. Ibn Arabi would recognize in these capacities a manifestation of the imaginal world operating through the body. For him, imagination wasn't an isolated function of the mind. It was the point of contact between the subtle and the dense, the spiritual and the material. When the mind generates a sensory experience without external stimulus, whether sound, touch, or temperature, it's demonstrating that the boundary between imagined and real isn't as solid as we assume. The imaginal world constantly crosses the membrane, separating interior from exterior. We experience this every night in dreams, where sensations seem completely real until we wake up. We experience it in intense memories, which can make the heart race years after the original event. We experience it when imagined music gives us goosebumps, when the memory of a taste makes the mouth water, when the thought of a loved one warms the chest. These capacities don't represent defects or anomalies. They represent doors. They demonstrate that the mind possesses resources we've barely begun to explore consciously. They demonstrate that the verbal monologue, that chattering voice that comments on everything, occupies only a small fraction of what we're capable of experiencing internally. Most people use these capacities accidentally, passively, unconsciously. The music appears in the head, uninvited. The physical sensation arises automatically. Someone's voice echoes without deliberate decision. We function like receivers of a radio stuck in automatic search mode, picking up random signals without ever choosing the frequency. But what if we could learn to use these capacities deliberately? What if the same potential that produces scattered daydreams could be directed towards something deeper? Contemplative traditions have always known that disciplined imagination serves as a tool of transformation. Visualization isn't fantasy, it's inner technology. The same mind that wanders through worries can learn to construct deliberate internal states. The same capacity that produces anxiety can produce peace. The instrument is the same. What changes is who's in command. Rudolf Steiner, the Austrian philosopher who founded anthroposophy in the early 20th century, saw in thought something most people never consider. For him, thought wasn't merely cerebral function, a cognitive tool, or a byproduct of neural activity. It was a complete spiritual path, a door to freedom that few even know exists. In his work, The Philosophy of Freedom, Steiner develops an idea that seems simple until you try to practice it. He argues that conscious thought, not the kind that simply happens automatically, but the kind a person chooses to think, represents the only truly free act a human being can perform. Think about this for a moment. Everything else is conditioned. The body was inherited from parents. Emotions were shaped by childhood, by traumas, by experiences we didn't choose. Opinions were absorbed from the environment, from family, from culture, from the era we were born in. Even the tastes and preferences we consider most personal carry the mark of influences we don't control. But there exists a space, small, hard to find, easy to lose, a space where someone can think something genuinely their own, not a thought of the body reacting, not a thought of society repeating, a thought born from the most original essence of each person. Steiner called this intuition, the moment when individual consciousness directly touches truth without intermediaries. The difference between the thought that happens and the thought we choose seems abstract until we observe carefully. Most of what we call thinking isn't activity, it's passivity. Thoughts appear, we watch, we react to them, we're dragged by them, but we rarely are the ones who initiate them. When someone offends us, the thought of anger arises on its own. We didn't decide to get angry, the anger appeared. When we worry about the future, catastrophic scenarios unfold automatically. We didn't choose to imagine the worst. Imagination followed its habitual course. When we try to sleep, thoughts keep spinning without our permission. We ask for silence. The mind ignores the request. This made me realize something disturbing. Most of the time, we're not thinking. We're being thought. Steiner saw in this condition not a fatality, but a starting point. The mind can be trained. Thought can be purified. Consciousness can learn to distinguish between what arises automatically and what it itself produces. And in this discernment lies the seed of freedom. There's an ancient technique called the memory palace that demonstrates this potential in concrete form. A person transforms abstract information into vivid images and distributes them mentally along a route they know well, their own house, a familiar path, a place from childhood. Then, to remember, one simply walks mentally through this route and finds each image where it was placed. Competitive memory athletes, those who memorize entire decks of cards in seconds or sequences of thousands of digits, weren't born with different brains. They use this technique. Ordinary people who learn the method see their recall capacity multiply by 5, by 10, sometimes more. The brain didn't change. What changed was the deliberate use of capacities that were always there. Verbal thought, that constant inner voice, offers advantages for planning, analysis, argumentation, but it exacts a price. People who think predominantly in words suffer more from looping thoughts. The voice doesn't stop. It repeats the same worries, rehearses the same arguments, ruminates over the same regrets. The instrument that should serve has come to command. Steiner would say this happens because we haven't yet learned to distinguish between the thought that thinks us and the thought that we think. As long as the inner voice operates on autopilot, repeating its habitual patterns without supervision, it imprisons. We are slaves to a machine we don't even realize is operating. But when that same voice becomes an instrument of an awakened will, everything changes. Thought ceases to be prison and transforms into a tool of liberation. The same capacity that produced obsessive rumination can produce deep contemplation. The same energy that fed worry can feed creation. We don't need to silence the mind to find peace. We need to wake up inside it. Discover who is thinking. Take command of the instrument we were given. Learn, perhaps for the first time, what it truly means to think, instead of just watching thoughts happen. Freedom isn't somewhere else. It's here, in the space between one thought and another, waiting to be discovered. The way you experience consciousness, that particular mixture of voices, images, feelings, and silences inside your head, belongs exclusively to you. No one will ever know what your mind really looks like, sounds like, or feels like inside, and you will never truly know another person's mind. We can describe, compare, use metaphors, but the direct experience remains untransferable. Each human being inhabits, in a way, a completely different universe. Two people can be in the same place, looking at the same things, hearing the same sounds, and still exist in radically distinct subjective worlds. One sees more vivid colors. Another hears nuances the first doesn't perceive. One processes the moment in words, another in sensations. One is present, another travels through memories or anticipations. The external world is the same. The internal world never coincides. The only life you truly live is not the one people observe from outside. It's the one happening inside your head. That constant flow of thoughts, images, emotions, sensations, that is the territory where your real existence unfolds. Everything else is scenery. The true stage is internal. This fundamental solitude could seem like condemnation, life imprisonment in a cell of isolated consciousness. But wisdom traditions see this isolation in a completely different way. Ibn Arabi taught that the human heart is the only place in the cosmos vast enough to contain God. The entire universe, with all its galaxies and dimensions, cannot contain him, but the heart of an awakened servant can. This inner immensity doesn't represent solitude in the common sense of the word. It represents the sacred space where the most important encounter can happen, the place where the finite touches the infinite, where the individual discovers their connection to the whole. Gurdjieff said that 200 truly conscious people could transform all life on Earth, not millions, 200. Because real consciousness is so rare, so precious, that even a small awakened group radiates an influence the sleeping multitude cannot produce. The world doesn't need everyone to wake up at the same time. It needs some to wake up for real. Steiner spoke of how genuine thought connects the individual to the universal spirit. When someone thinks in a truly free way, not reacting, not repeating, not being thought, that person touches something that transcends their individuality. Authentic thought doesn't isolate, it connects. The solitude of individual consciousness finds, in the act of thinking freely, the bridge to something greater. We began this journey with a disturbing number. Nearly half of waking life passes in automatic monologues no one controls. The mind wanders. Thoughts think the person. Dozens of small selves take turns at the controls without anyone noticing. But now we can see this same phenomenon in another light. The invisible prison doesn't represent a personal defect. It represents the default human condition, the starting point we all share. The same masters who diagnosed this condition also mapped paths out. The same consciousness that remains captive can awaken through attentive observation of its own internal processes. Waking sleep exists, but awakening also exists. Fragmentation into multiple selves is real, but the possibility of integration is also real. The automatic monologue dominates, but free thought can emerge. The fundamental solitude of each mind doesn't represent condemnation. It represents a starting point. No one can wake up in your place. That's the bad news. But upon awakening, you discover you were never separate from anything. That's the good news. The inner universe you inhabit, with all its voices, images, sensations, and silences, is the laboratory where transformation happens. It's there, in that space no one else can access. That freedom becomes possible. Gurdjieff, Ibn Arabi, and Steiner agreed on a fundamental point. The path passes through attention, through observation, through the gradual awakening of that which in us can witness without getting lost in what it witnesses. We have developed audio tools based on frequencies that facilitate exactly this process, preparing the mind to exit autopilot mode and enter the state of presence the masters described. To discover how to access this portal and begin your own journey of awakening, click the link on the screen or in the comments. If this video resonated with you, write in the comments. It made sense to me.